Shut down the drug empire. Target audience: adults. Chapter 1. The Arena of Scraps. The roar of the small, illicit crowd was a familiar symphony to Obeah. At 22, his frame was lean but coiled with a startling power, honed in countless back alley brawls and unsanctioned street fights. Tonight, the cracked concrete lot behind the derelict warehouse reeked of stale beer, damp earth, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Across from him, Sarjo, 24, moved with a fluid grace that belied his muscular build, his eyes sharp, reflecting the flickering street lamp. He's a big one, Sarge, Obeah grunted, bouncing on the balls of his feet, feeling the tremor of anticipation. Sarjo spat, a thin stream of saliva hitting the ground. Bigger they are, harder they fall, little brother. Obeah wasn't his actual brother, but in the brutal, low-stakes world they inhabited, their bond was thicker than blood. They'd learned to fight together, to trust only each other, sharing every meager payout and every bruising defeat. Another fighter, a hulking brute named Hammer, stepped into the makeshift ring. His reputation preceded him, a silent, relentless battering ram. The crowd, a mix of desperate gamblers and thrill-seekers, surged forward, their shouts echoing off the grimy walls. The fight began. It was a messy, brutal dance. Hammer swung like an enraged bear, but Sarjo was quicker, weaving, ducking, delivering sharp, precise blows. Obeah watched, his instincts humming, ready to jump in if the unwritten rules of the street fight were broken. Sarjo took a punishing hit to the ribs, a grunt escaping him, but he retaliated with a flurry of strikes, ending with a vicious uppercut that sent Hammer crashing to the ground, unconscious. A ragged cheer erupted. Hands reached out, some offering congratulations, others money. The organizer, a shifty-eyed man named Snake, peeled off a few crumpled bills. "That's it," he said, his voice flat. "Next week." Sarjo pocketed the money, his face grim despite the victory. "Barely enough for ramen, Obeah." Obeah nodded, his own disappointment a bitter taste. They were good, perhaps the best in this underground circuit. They fought hard, took their lumps, but the payouts were pathetic. Ramen, cheap beer, and a shared dingy apartment. That was the sum total of their ambition in this life. They dreamed of more, but the path was obscured by the endless concrete and the ever-present hunger. As they walked away, the night air cool on their sweaty skin, a smooth voice cut through the urban hum. "Impressive. Very impressive, son." A man stood in the shadows, leaning against a sleek, black car that looked wildly out of place in this broken-down neighborhood. He was impeccably dressed, late 30s, with an air of quiet authority. "Tony." Sarjo stopped, Obeah instinctively moving to his side. "Who are you?" Sarjo asked, wary. Tony pushed off the car, stepping into the weak light. He held up a hand. "No threat. Just an observer. My name's Tony. And I saw potential tonight. Real potential." He gestured to the crumpled bills in Sarjo's hand. "You risk your teeth for scraps. How would you like to make real money? The kind that changes your life?" Sarjo's eyes narrowed. "What kind of money are we talking about?" Tony smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. "The kind of money that comes from selling drugs. A lot of drugs." Sarjo's gaze flickered to Obeah, then back to Tony. "I wouldn't do anything like that without my best friend. Obeah's in, or I'm out." Tony's smile widened. "Loyalty. I like that. Yes. Obeah can be involved. We can discuss the details. Tomorrow night. Same time, same place, but just us. No fights." Obeah felt a jolt of adrenaline, different from the fight thrill. This was a tremor of the unknown, of possibility. He met Sarjo's gaze. The fight money was a joke. This could be their way out. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Offer. The following night, the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken promise. Obeah and Sarjo arrived at the deserted lot to find Tony already there, leaning against his car, a briefcase on the hood. No fighting rings, no cheering crowds. Just the three of them, and the hum of distant city life. "So," Tony began, his voice calm, direct. "You two have a reputation for being tough, for being loyal to each other, and for being smart enough to know when you're being underpaid. He opened the briefcase. Inside, stacked in neat, vacuum-sealed bricks, were bundles of cash. And next to the cash, several small, clear baggies filled with a crystalline substance. The scent was acrid, chemical. This, Tony said, gesturing to the drugs, is just a sample. High grade. The kind that sells itself once people get a taste. I'm looking for reliable distributors. People who can move product, stay quiet, and understand the value of a good partnership. He looked from Sarjo to Obia. You start with this. I give you the product, you sell it, you bring me my cut, you keep yours. It's simple. And the money you'll make will dwarf anything you've ever earned from those little street performances. Obia felt a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. He'd seen plenty of addicts on the streets, the ruined lives, the desperation. But he'd also seen the men who sold to them, the ones with the flash cars and the expensive clothes. It was a dangerous game, one they'd always avoided. But now, Sarjo picked up one of the small baggies, examining it. How much are we talking, Tony? Tony named a figure, a number that made Obia's eyes widen. It was more than they made in a month of fighting. We'll give it a shot, Obia said, his voice surprising himself with its firmness. He looked at Sarjo, who nodded. This was their chance, their ticket out of the grime. Tony smiled, produced a burner phone, and handed it to Sarjo. This is for business. My number is programmed in. I'll send you locations, quantities. You move it, connect with buyers. Any problems, you call this number. But try not to have problems. His eyes held a flicker of warning. And remember, this is about discretion. Don't talk. Don't draw attention. Just sell. They left with a small cache of drugs and a feeling of unreality. The weight of the world seemed to shift. They were no longer just street fighters. They were in the game. The first few weeks were slow. Obia and Sarjo, accustomed to direct confrontation, found the clandestine world of drug dealing to be opaque and frustrating. Buyers were suspicious, deals fell through, and the money trickled in, barely an improvement over their fighting earnings. They still took the occasional street fight, clinging to the familiar, the comfort of predictable pain and predictable, if paltry, reward. This is bullshit, Obia, Sarjo grumbled one night, counting a handful of small bills. We're risking our necks for pennies. We should just go back to smashing faces. Obia stared at the ceiling of the cramped apartment. No, Tony said, it takes time. Connections. We just need to understand the market better. He spent hours walking, observing, listening. He saw the desperation in the eyes of addicts, the hungry look of those seeking a high. He learned the subtle signals, the coded language. Slowly, painstakingly, they started to make inroads. Then, imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. A few successful deals led to word of mouth. Their reputation for having quality product, for being reliable and discreet, grew. The trickle became a stream, then a flow. The small bags became larger quantities. The burner phone buzzed constantly. The money started piling up. Not just hundreds, but thousands. They moved out of the cramped apartment into a larger one, then a small house. They bought new clothes, went to places they'd only ever dreamed of. The street fights became a distant memory, a past life they shed like old skin. Why risk a broken nose for a few $100 when tens of thousands were coming in every week? One evening, sitting in their new, sparsely furnished living room, surrounded by stacks of cash, Obia looked at Sarjo. The adrenaline, the rush of power, coursed through him. Sarge, Obia began, his voice low, intense. This is good. But it's not enough. We're moving product, making money, but we're still working for someone else. He picked up a thick wad of bills. We could build something bigger. An empire. Sarjo's eyes, usually so hard, gleamed with an answering fire. The same ambition that had simmered beneath Obia's surface was now blazing in his friend. An empire, he echoed, a slow smile spreading across his face. You mean, our own operation? Our own supply? Our own network? Exactly, Obeah said, the word a whisper that felt like a shout in his mind. We cut out the middleman, control the supply chain. We dominate this city. The idea, born from the shared hunger for more, exploded between them, filling the room with electric energy. The adrenaline surged, a potent drug itself. We'll need more than quick fists, Sarjo said, practical as ever. We'll need to protect what we build. And we'll need the muscle to take what we want. Obeah nodded. I know just the man. Chapter 3. The Ascent. The contact was Sophian, a man in his late 30s with a quiet demeanor and a fearsome reputation in the underworld for procuring anything, from forged documents to an arsenal. Sarjo had known him from the fringes of the fighting circuit, a man who dealt in the shadows and rarely made direct appearances. They met Sophian in a secluded cafe, far from the usual haunts. Sophian listened patiently, his dark eyes unreadable, as Obeah laid out the vision, a drug empire built on efficiency, ruthless expansion, and an unshakable resolve. You want guns, Sophian summarized, his voice a low rasp. And men ready to fight, ready to die. Men who are loyal, Obeah clarified. And skilled. A private army. Sophian named a price, exorbitant but not impossible given their recent success. It will take time. And trust. My trust, and yours. They agreed. Over the next few weeks, Sophian delivered. First, a steady stream of firearms. Pistols, assault rifles, shotguns, all carefully sourced and untraceable. Then, the men. Hardened, streetwise veterans, ex-cons, and young, hungry soldiers eager for a piece of the action. They set up secret training facilities, drilling their new recruits in tactics and loyalty. Obeah and Sarjo were no longer just dealers. They were generals commanding an army. With their new resources, the drug empire blossomed. They no longer relied solely on Tony's initial supply. They found their own channels, leveraging the growing power. The basement of their new, sprawling mansion became a fortress, a hub for their rapidly expanding operations. And then, Tony, wary of the growing independence but still seeing the value in their burgeoning network, offered a new proposition. I can increase your supply tenfold, he'd said, during one discreet meeting. Cut out the risks of ground transport. Massive quantities. Directly to you. Obeah and Sarjo had agreed, their ambition overriding any lingering caution. Weeks later, the rumble of a low-flying plane in the dead of night became their new soundtrack. Kilos of product, refined and potent, were dropped by parachute directly into a pre-arranged drop zone near their mansion, collected by their men, and spirited into the fortified basement. They were making staggering amounts of money. The city was theirs, or so it felt. Their product was stronger, the distribution network faster, their crew more disciplined. They expanded into new territories, pushing out smaller players, absorbing their networks, or crushing them if they resisted. Obeah, once a street fighter scraping for coins, now commanded an organization that operated with military precision. Sarjo was his fierce, indispensable lieutenant, the enforcer who ensured loyalty and dealt with any and all dissent. Their reign, however, was not unnoticed. Chapter 4. The Serpent's Rival. Glenn, at 31, was a force of nature in the city's criminal underworld. He had built his own drug empire through sheer ruthlessness and an uncanny ability to sniff out weakness. His territory had been vast, his control absolute. Until Obeah and Sarjo arrived. Glenn watched them with growing fury. The drugs were purer, their prices competitive, and their methods surprisingly effective. They were taking his buyers, siphoning off his profits, encroaching on his turf. Every new rumor of Obeah and Sarjo's success was a fresh insult, a direct challenge to his authority. Glenn saw them not as rivals to be negotiated with, but as an infestation to be purged. He had heard the whispers of their expanding network, their new men, their sophisticated supply drops. He understood the threat. He prided himself on being the most brutal, the most feared. And Obeah and Sarjo were undermining that, making him look weak. They're bleeding us dry, Glenn snarled at his top enforcers, his eyes cold and devoid of mercy. They think they can just waltz in and take what's mine. They're about to learn a very painful lesson. He gave the order. A preemptive strike. Not just a warning, but a decisive blow designed to cripple and terrify. He wanted to dismantle their operation, seize their supply, and make an example of them. Chapter 5. The war begins. The attack came swiftly, brutally, in the dead of night. Glenn's men, a hardened, heavily armed crew, moved with purpose. They hit several of Obeah and Sarjo's distribution hubs simultaneously, striking at the heart of their empire. Gunfire shattered the silence of the night. Explosions rocked buildings. Obeah and Sarjo's men, though well trained, were caught off guard by the coordinated assault. The streets turned into a war zone. Obeah was at the mansion, coordinating defenses, when the frantic calls started coming in. They're everywhere, boss. They got the warehouse. The North Depot is down. Then, the call from the downtown sector. Sarjo's hit. They're swarming him. Obeah's blood ran cold. He grabbed his weapons, barked orders to his remaining men. Get to Sarjo. Now. He arrived at the scene of the downtown battle to a horrific sight. The street was littered with bodies, his men cut down, their blood staining the asphalt. And in the center of it all, Sarjo lay motionless, a grotesque tableau bathed in the lurid glow of a burning car. Sarjo. Obeah screamed, his voice raw, tearing through the din of sporadic gunfire. He rushed forward, but his own men pulled him back, dragging him into the relative safety of an alley. Too many, boss. We gotta pull back. A young man named Lee, one of Obeah's most loyal, shouted, his face streaked with grime and fear. Obeah fought against them, his mind reeling. Sarjo. Dead. It was impossible. His brother, his other half. Killed. The world tilted on its axis. As the last of Obeah's men retreated, beaten and demoralized, Glenn's crew consolidated their victory. Amidst the chaos, a small team moved with precision. They found Lee, caught him attempting to retrieve a fallen comrade, and dragged him away. Beaten and disoriented, Lee offered no resistance. Glenn arrived on the scene, surveying the carnage with a grim satisfaction. His men had done the job. The rival empire had been brought to its knees. We got one of theirs, boss, one of his enforcers reported, dragging the bound and bloodied Lee forward. A lieutenant, looks like. Glenn's eyes gleamed. Good. Take him to the interrogation room. He's going to tell us everything. Chapter 6. The Confession. Lee awoke to blinding light and the smell of stale blood. He was bound to a chair, his face swollen, his body a symphony of aches. Glenn stood before him, a silhouette against the harsh light, a cruel smile playing on his lips. So, Lee, Glenn began, his voice surprisingly calm, almost conversational. You were a loyal dog, weren't you? For Obeah. For Sarjo. He kicked Lee's chair, sending a jolt of pain through him. Too bad they couldn't protect you. Lee kept his gaze defiant, though fear churned in his gut. He knew what kind of man Glenn was. He'd heard the stories. I'm going to ask you a question, Lee, Glenn continued, picking up a wicked-looking knife from a nearby table, the blade catching the light. And you're going to answer it. Or you're going to wish you were dead. He leaned in close, his breath foul. Where did Obeah and Sarjo get their supply? Who was their main source? Lee clenched his jaw. He had seen the loyalty Sarjo and Obeah commanded, and he had given it freely. He wouldn't betray them. Glenn smiled again, a cold, empty expression. You're a brave boy. For now. The torture was systematic, brutal, and relentless. Hours bled into an eternity of agonizing pain. Every muscle screamed, every nerve ending burned. Lee held out, recalling Obeah's strength, Sarjo's fearlessness. But the human body has its limits. The pain became an unbearable fire, consuming his resolve. His mind fractured. He saw Sarjo's lifeless eyes, Obeah's devastated face. He heard Glenn's calm voice, asking the same question again and again. Finally, broken, whimpering, Lee whispered the name. Tony. It was Tony. He supplied them. Glenn straightened, a triumphant glint in his eye. Tony. The ghost. Always knew he was pulling strings. Thank you, Lee. You've been very helpful. Lee passed out, the last thing he heard being Glenn's chilling laughter. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Obeah was a storm of raw grief and incandescent rage. Sarjo was gone. His brother, his rock, murdered. The world had gone dark. He wanted vengeance, a blood reckoning that would wash away the pain and the injustice. We hit them, Obeah declared, his voice hoarse, eyes burning with manic intensity. We find Glenn, and we end him. Every single one of his men. His remaining crew, battered and demoralized from the ambush, hesitated. They had lost too many, too much. But no one dared defy Obeah in his current state. He was a force of nature, driven by a singular, consuming purpose. Sophian, the arms dealer, was contacted again, his face grim as he listened to Obeah's plan. You're outnumbered, Obeah. He's consolidated. He's stronger now. I don't care, Obeah snarled. Sarjo deserves justice. We hit him, Sophian. Get me more men, more firepower. Whatever it takes. Through sheer force of will, Obeah rallied his depleted forces. They spent days tracking Glenn, using every contact, every rumor. They found him, holed up in a fortified complex on the outskirts of the city, celebrating his victory, oblivious to the coming storm. The next gun battle was a desperate, chaotic affair. Obeah, leading from the front, fought with a savage fury, fueled by grief. His men, inspired by his rage, fought bravely, but it wasn't enough. Glenn's forces were too entrenched, too well armed, their numbers too great. The shootout raged for what felt like an eternity. Obeah saw his men fall around him, saw the hopelessness in their eyes. His reckless charge was turning into a suicidal last stand. He was cornered, his ammunition running low, blood seeping from a superficial wound on his arm. Fall back. Retreat. A voice screamed, one of his surviving lieutenants. Obeah hesitated, wanting to push on, to die fighting for Sarjo. But the tactical mind that had built an empire, however briefly, knew it was futile. To continue was to die for nothing. He bit back a frustrated roar, covering his men as they pulled back, melting into the urban labyrinth, defeated. Glenn's men didn't pursue them far. They had won. The war was over. For now. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. Glenn, having crushed Obeah's forces, turned his attention to the source. Lee's confession had been gold. Tony, the elusive supplier who had always managed to stay hidden. Glenn saw an opportunity to not only secure his dominance but to eliminate any future competition from the supply chain itself. He tracked Tony through a network of informants and financial records, a trail that led to a lavish, secluded penthouse at the top of a gleaming skyscraper. Glenn brought his most trusted men, moving with decisive swiftness. They breached Tony's penthouse in the dead of night. Tony, caught completely off guard, managed to reach for a hidden gun, but it was too late. Glenn himself delivered the killing blow, a single, precise shot to the head. The man who had lured Obeah and Sarjo into the drug game, who had supplied the dreams with untold kilos, lay dead on his marble floor. Obeah received the news the next morning. Tony was dead. The primary source of his drugs, the lifeline of his empire, was gone. He sat in the ruins of his ambition, the silence of his now empty mansion deafening. Sarjo was dead. Their men were scattered, demoralized, or dead. Their empire, so painstakingly built, had crumbled in weeks. And now Tony, the very source of their power, was eliminated. There were no more drugs to sell. No more men to rally. No more empire to fight for. Glenn had won. He had shut him down completely. Obeah looked at his hands, once so quick in a street fight, then stained with the blood of an empire. He saw the bodies of his friends, the faces of his fallen men, the calculating smile of Glenn. He could not defeat him. Not now. Not ever. The game was over. He had lost everything. A cold, stark realization settled over him. There was nothing left here. No honor, no revenge, no future. Only ghosts and the bitter taste of defeat. He made a decision. A final, desperate act of self-preservation. He would leave. Leave the city, leave the ghosts, leave the empire that had risen and fallen in a bloody, brutal flash. He packed a single bag, leaving behind the stacks of cash, the expensive clothes, the symbols of his failed ambition. He left the city under the cover of darkness, a ghost himself, carrying nothing but his grief and the shattered remnants of his soul. He moved to another land, a place where no one knew his name, no one knew his past. He started a new life, working odd jobs, living simply. The adrenaline of the fight, the rush of the empire, was a distant, painful memory. He was no longer Obeah, the drug lord, the ambitious young man who sought to conquer the city. He was just a man, adrift, haunted by the empire he failed to protect, and the friend he lost in the war. The empire of Obeah and Sajo was shut down. And Obeah, the last survivor, simply vanished. The end. Story by Kayode Ike.